Hello everyone and welcome to our panel. As we've heard from the voice of God, this panel is going to be about disinformation. Pretty wide subject, a broad topic that a lot of us deal with and work on. And I have a great set of panelists who will be talking with me and hopefully with you about what it means to live in the age of disinformation and how do we fight lies. Before I start introducing my panelists, I would like to thank everyone who's actually here at this moment, because I know that the weather is very tempting, the food's great, and this is my first conference at the seaside, and I can tell you that I would personally be anywhere else but here, so I completely understand those who are not here, while at the same time I'm very grateful that we have an audience. So, without further ado, let me begin by inviting the following people to join us. First up is Robert Pessell, the Senior Officer for Russia and the Western Balkans at the NATO PDD. The second one is Arnis Schnorre, Deputy Director of the European Center of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats. And then we have Rufin Zamfir, Program Director of the Global Focus Center from Romania. Nico De Pedro, my good friend and a senior fellow at the Institute for Statecraft. And Tomas Krišak, Project Coordinator, Open Society Foundation in Bratislava. So, tonight on Game of Thrones, we're going to go and see who's going to sit on the Iron Throne at the end of this debate. But let me start off by asking you probably the most difficult question that I could come up with, and that is, when it comes to disinformation, what is it that keeps you awake at night? What is your biggest concern? And let's start this way, so starting with Robert.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Well, what keeps me awake is the most banal, perhaps issue, which is how seriously it is taken. Now, I think in many respects, the answer to the question, how seriously is it taken, in many places, is of course that the level of situational awareness, to use the NATO jargon, has dramatically increased and improved over the last years. That is true. And there is a fantastic work being done by NGO community experts and I say media. I think the governments have definitely done a work, and organizations such as NATO and European Union likewise. But nevertheless, because if you look at disinformation, I think one has to put it in a certain context. It's not a problem, it's like a disease of sorts, but it's part of a broader set of illnesses. So you can look at it from the point of view of hybrid challenges or threats, and it's just one of them. Others being, for example, various instruments such as traditional intelligence operations, military, corruption, and so on. But the tricky part of the business is that, of course, this information is often linked. So, for example, you have a cyber attack, which is, let's say, successful, and information is obtained, and then it's used for disinformation, and so on. The second way in which you can look at it is of course, about the political goals of the disinformation, because disinformation can be employed for different purposes, but the primary concern, the one that one talks most, is of course if it comes from the state actors, of course, because of the resources, because of the Russian best known de facto propaganda outlets such as Sputnik and Россия Сегодня, a few others. The combined budget is about 1 billion. That's a lot, euros. The third aspect, which you can and should perhaps look at it, is what about the effect on society, which is highly divisional. Then you can look at it as also, and some people do, unfortunately, you can monetize it. It can be good business. We've seen some cases of some fake operations in some countries. But the last aspect is very simple as well. It's basically, and perhaps it should be seen, it's a kind of a criminal activity. So there are many strands. So what keeps me awake, to answer your question, is that we have to deal with this. It's situational awareness is just a start. Attribution is the second step. But then you actually have to take specific steps. And will be time to discuss it. And different stakeholders have different responsibilities. But it's the sort of the holistic approach which has to be combined with expertise in specific areas. So I'll stop there.
Okay, I'm pretty sure we'll have time to talk about like specific things that we can do and the specific things that are already being implemented to fight this. But Arnis, what keeps you awake at night?
Thank you. Well, Robert already made a good kind of introduction. It's not the disinformation per se which keeps me up at the night. So we at the European Center for Countering Hybrid Threats see it's as one of the tools of wider hybrid environment. So what's keeping me up at the night, I think it's the most important thing that we do our homework, that we realize where are our weak spots, and that we have a good understanding what to do with them. And so, I mean, if we will do that homework, then it would be easier for us to kind of, counter with this information. As Robert said, it won't go away. It was there, it is there, and it will be there. So I think the most important thing just to realize where we are and what we can do to make us more resilient and move forward. So I will just stop at that. Okay. Thank you.
And let's pass it on to Rufin.
So it's my turn. Is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. So what keeps me awake at night in terms of when it comes to disinformation? Well, the fact that disinformation is only the tip of the iceberg. This is what keeps me awake at night. The fact that when you come to analyze the vulnerabilities in our society, you come to the conclusion, and it's as worrying as it's easy to draw this conclusion. It's the fact that the disinformation and propaganda, it's the most visible part of the vulnerabilities in our society. The subversion, it's something that we don't see. The business political nexus that is creating state capture in part of not just the eastern part of Europe or Western Balkans or whatever. This is what is the worrying part of the phenomenon, and also the fact that we're concentrating attention on what the outside actors, what the foreign ones are doing in order to push their agenda in our countries, whereas for the larger part of our Europe, let's call it this way, the internal actors are just as bad, if not worse than the outsiders. Because at the end of the day, this vulnerabilities is not something that the foreign actors, being state actors like Russia and China and Turkey and whatever, or non-state actors, foreign non-state actors like ISIS or different fringe groups of Al-Qaeda and whatever, are creating in our societies. But these vulnerabilities are here with us because we do not do enough to close these gaps. And for them, it's just great return on investment, so to say. And they're exploiting these gaps, they're exploiting the tribalization of society, for example. They're exploiting the greed of politicians, for a different one. And they're doing this by meeting auspicious conditions in our countries. So this is what keeps me awake at night.
Okay, and at this point we already have quite a long list of things that we could potentially discuss, but let me move on to Nico and hear about what you would like to add.
Maybe, can you hear me well? Yes? Okay, thank you. So, following what Rufin has just said, I think my biggest, or what should be our biggest concern is that first we have still far from having a good understanding of the challenge/threat that we are facing. We are far from it. We have to keep in mind that information in the last 20, 25 years is at the center of our lives. Everyone is carrying a smartphone. We are completely 24/7 connected, and information is at the center of our lives. And then there is social media. And I'm a big fan of it. I really enjoy on Twitter, for instance, but to some extent we have created what can be potentially weapons of mass destruction to our societies. And so far, the social media is creating a completely new ecosystem, media ecosystem. There's a rapid transformation of our public conversation, this digitalization of the conversation. This is a huge change in terms of how we get and how this information is disseminated, how we get knowledge, and how we manage, or how information is managed in our societies. And this is a huge thing. And we are probably just at the beginning of it. So we don't know what is going to happen or how it will look like in the next 10, 15, 20 years, but for sure different from now. And this is going to be a huge thing. I fully agree with what has been already said. And it's important also to keep in mind that disinformation is not a domain, it's a cross-cutting domain, so it's affecting all parts of society. It's like cyber, so it's not a problem of 2 or 3 media outlets on online saying bullshits or crazy stories or whatever. No, it's much deeper than that. It's affecting the whole society. It's not a problem of fake news, it's a problem of dissemination of manipulated information, of insidious narratives that can really undermine the legitimacy of our societies. Plus, it's also important to keep in mind that it's not taking place within a vacuum. So when it comes to hostile actors like Russia, disinformation is part of a broad, full-range strategy that goes from nuclear intimidation to cultural diplomacy. So they have this wide understanding. And related to this has a domestic or purely domestic dimension and international one. When it comes to this domestic dimension is where we cannot foresee or we cannot say what it will look like in next 10, 15 years. But the kind of ecosystem that we have right now in place, Russia knows how to exploit it and how to use it to undermine us. So this is my concern. Related to these 2 brief points, the second one is that we are yet to have a sound strategy to cope with it. We don't have that strategy. We are not yet there. We are applying some reactive measures and some interesting steps, but we are far from, because we are lacking this good understanding or deep understanding of the problem, we are not having this strategy. And I'm fearing that it's difficult to develop a strategy or an all-encompassing strategy about it because of the own nature of the challenge and the threat. And the third point, and also connected to this, is that for the foreseeable future we will be missing the most powerful tool to face the problem that we are facing, which is an inspiring narrative. At least in Europe, we will be missing an inspiring narrative about the West. And this is not going to change in the short term. So we will have a lack of this, and that's going to be a pretty serious thing. Keep in mind, for instance, that the collapse of the Soviet Union was basically an issue, or mostly an issue about legitimacy. It's legitimacy what is at stake, and it's legitimacy what this kind of disinformation operations try to undermine. And so far, to some extent, they have been successful in terms of influencing our decision-making cycle and the legitimacy of our systems. So this is what, well, frankly speaking, not keeping me up at nights. At 11 more or less every day I'm really sleeping, but it's really a concern for me.
Okay, thank you, Nico. I'm sure we will come back to a couple of points that you've mentioned, and just to finish this round of this preliminary question. Tomasz.
So, what keeps me at night is the existence of disinformation, since they are being produced 24/7, and sometimes when there's an urgent case, when there's a new piece of disinformation that is spreading virally, it takes a night shift. So sometimes I just need to wake up or stay awake the whole night and just work on stopping that particular disinformation. So yeah, disinformation can keep us awake even though they don't have to concern us. And what I find problematic about disinformation is the scale of the problem, because each and every day we wake up into new media reality which is created by this new ocean of information where a vast majority of that information is actually fake or misleading or toxic or in some way disrupting our view of reality. And I think the big challenge and the big problem here is also the impact of this problem on our society and on particular human lives and the quality of human life, as we are witnessing that, for instance, in Slovakia we see this drop when you are asking or questioning people whether they feel happy, secure, and etc. They have very different opinions than they had 10 years ago, and the amount of intolerance and other aspects is ever growing, and this is due to the new infosphere, which is far more troublesome and toxic than it was before. And our minds are what we are consuming, so therefore it's more like we are reprogramming the whole civilization and turning ourselves to be a little bit, I wouldn't say evil, but the worst versions of ourselves as we could be. And also what I find problematic is the amount of evolution in the field of disinformation, as we are on a brink of new technology, the deepfake, and we don't really know how much mess and problems this is going to cause in the near future. And also one of the aspects is that this problem is still underestimated, not only by the government but also by society. Most of the people who are actually affected by disinformation are the ones who will tell you that, oh, that would never happen to me, I'm too intelligent to fall for that, and etc. So, and also the global duopolies like Google and Facebook, they say they do a lot to fight disinformation and to make the infosphere a better one, but I think they can do far more, and we have a long way ahead of us, which should be filled by cooperation of all the stakeholders mentioned. So I'm just hoping that soon we will turn from this reactive measures into a time where we will be able to cooperate and create working strategies that would create better infosphere of tomorrow.
That's a fair answer. We know that large swaths of people are prone to actually believe in this information, are unable to recognize it, unable to distinguish wheat from the chaff. We can all use examples, I'm sure, of people from our families who, I have a family member, I'm not going to name her, but hi mom, who will occasionally call me and say, hey, did you see that in the news? Or send me a link or something. I'm like, mom, that's fake news, that's disinformation. She's like, but are you sure? And my question is always, how are we so prone, I mean, this is without passing any judgment, but how are we so prone to trust, to believe into this? And how are we so prone to, if not just straight out believing these things, how are we so prone to doubting what must be facts or doubting that something is not a lie? Maybe Zamfir, you could be the best person for this because you told me that you worked on studying lies. So why do people believe in lies?
Well, I mean, Alexander, there are a lot of different answers to your question. There are short one and long one. Why people do believe in lies. Oftentimes, we do believe in lies because those lies are echoing our beliefs in a way, or they are filling gaps that we don't, information gaps that we need to be filled. Getting back a bit to your comment and to step on what my previous colleagues here were saying about the phenomena of disinformation, and it also tackle on lies. part of the problem is not generated only by the disinformation campaigns, because part of the problem is generated by the misinformation, not disinformation, but misinformation. And this is the part where critical thinking should be supported with media literacy programs and with spreading information about the phenomena and helping people to understand and internalize these values. Yeah, it's something that is impacting all the society. This quoting, if it's on TV, then it's real thing. It's something that we had it during previous regimes, during communist regimes, all of our eastern part of Europe. And unfortunately, the change of the regime didn't came with a change of mentalities in this sense. Unfortunately, the solution was searched in the wrong place. And this solution was something that didn't involve the whole of society, and not just governments or not just the educational system, but also civil society, also, I know, different sort of groups. And yeah, we're still having with us.
Robert, you seem to be nodding in agreement.
Yes, but I am definitely, absolutely. But I think there are some, let's do a little sort of character assassination ourselves.
Please.
I mean, as people in society of Anno Domini 2019, look, I mean, one of the most basic reasons to answer your question is because people are inherently lazy. And that is associated with the fact that, we all like to believe that clever people are lazy because you find ways in which you have more fun. That's fine. I mean, that's nothing kind of, intrinsically wrong. But it has very serious consequences when it comes to those issues. I mean, Hannah Arendt wrote this famous essay which said, once you stop mixing facts and opinions, and you mix them not because you can't see the difference, but because you just didn't bother to think too much about it. That, in my view, is associated with a very broad intellectual, or the opposite phenomenon today, which is a short attention span. Now, I don't know what to do about this. I mean, I think I know what to do myself, but I can't sort of convince other people. It's like you read something which sounds superficially interesting, etc. Conspiracy theory, whatever. People on whatever, some planet have 3 heads and so on. But then maybe you should read a longer article or actually read a book, God forbid. But short attention span. Third reason is, I think, the world is complicated. It has become more complicated. That's the truth of it. There's globalization and this, you have to daily you come across things which are new to you. So you try to simplify them and, hey, somebody has a ready recipe. It's like, bad food, very attractive even though you get indigestion afterwards. Third issue, I think, is a certain amount of gullibility when it comes to things being offered. We live in a very market-oriented world. One specific example, not really political, I think, but, this is from my country, in Poland. It's called a Pizzagate of sorts. One famous chain, pizza delivery, very anonymous, some people have used it and basically pretending to be people distributing pizza from that chain. And they went around and offered people a free gadget, which actually was a stick, memory stick. People put it in because that way you put it in and answer a few questions, you get whatever, free pizza. Yeah. And surprise, surprise, in literally 20 minutes, they had full access to the information which they used for whatever purposes. And the last reason is, I know it's there's quite a few young people in the audience. I mean, but perhaps it doesn't just apply to young people, but perhaps we're a little bit too much taken in by the social media platforms. I mean, there has to be a bit more conscious approach to this. One example from a country already mentioned, Russia. It's actually a tragic event, the superjet crash recently, okay? So many people, that really terrible tragedy, and we all feel it. And then there was one of the considered freest social media platforms, Telegram, right? There was a big debate. But actually, when people looked at it, those who kind of analyze these things, it transpired that 85 or close to 90% of the views exchanged there were promoted, sometimes from bots, views providing arguments for two opposing camps, not surprisingly, one for the airline agency and the other one for the producers of the plane, because of course they had reasons to blame the other side. Now, that is a pretty frightening statistics when you think of it, and at least it's worth bearing this kind of possibility in mind when you go in and sort of happily swim in this digital soup.
Yeah, but out of frustration, I think the first question is, well, what do we do about it? But to sort of expand on that question, I mean, we have seen suggestions of inoculation, to treat this as a disease. You inoculate before the disease gets to you. So by introducing programs for critical thinking in schools, etc., and we've seen the good example of Finland recently that was in the news there, where Finland is now a country that has been deemed the most resilient to malign influence. Does it work? I mean, we can ask Agnes maybe, is this the approach? Does it work in every single case?
No, well, yes, of course, every case is a bit different. Well, I cannot really detailedly say if it's working in Finland, as I'm not myself from Finland. But certainly, that's the one way forward. The other one, social media companies was mentioned, and platforms here that I think that the governments have the tools. Keep, or even EU-wide, keep pressure on them, as, for example, as traditional media have. I mean, they are in front of the law. They are responsible if they publish lies. So the same kind of pressure should be put on social media companies as well. So not to let them get off the hook so easily, just saying we provide the platform, we don't answer for the content, but just keep pressuring them that in these times they should be answering for the content, and if it's kind of blatant lies or something, then they should be held responsible, and they are getting a lot of profit. So it's basically they need to have to be more responsible as well. So that's another way we can look into it.
Tomasz, would you agree with this?
I think that.
I mean, we had a discussion prior to this panel about the social networks, and the reason why I'm asking you this is because I think we agreed on the fact that although there are positives and negatives, we tend to emphasize the negatives. But that there must be some way to deal with the social networks and the way that they're being used to propagate disinformation.
Social media is a human-made tool, like every other tool, like hammer or anything else that was made by humans, and it can be used for a good purpose, and it can be used for a bad purpose. And I think our mission is to actually persuade people and show them the way how to use social media in a good way, and how to use them to make the world a more stable place where people are able to make informed decisions. And currently, because social media are a new phenomena and we are just learning how to move in this digital infosphere, I think it's justifiable that social media are making all these mistakes, and they made a lot of mistakes in the past that opened gates for malicious players who wanted to misuse them. But now, after more than 10 years of their existence, I don't think that we have any more time to explore this problem any further, but we need to take a firm action. And that, for once, is to create a better system of content moderation, because currently the way, for instance, Facebook uses its moderators, it's very vague, it's very non-professional, and it's more like I don't wonder it doesn't work, since you have these tens of thousands of moderators who are actually sitting somewhere in Philippines and some remote places, and they are not educated to do their job properly, and yet they are given rule books that are very vague, and basically they do not know what to do in situations which are like in this gray area and are not particularly easy to recognize as something like false news or etc. So I think that social media should invest into better monitoring systems and better early response systems that can be connected not to an army of nameless moderators, but they should be more reliant on users themselves and actually promote them for their activities and show them that the people who are mainly using social media, the general public, the 2 billion people who are, the more than 2 billion people who are actually online on social platforms created by Google and Facebook, they are the ones who can be the future strategy, how to tackle disinformation and recreate this whole space so it's going to be better. And I don't think a small group of people can fix this problem. So I think the whole strategy should move this way, like how to educate the masses to actually be able to improve the quality of infosphere.
Well, I also don't think that we should focus solely on social media. As a journalist, as a media professional, actually I think general media is also quite responsible for disseminating and production of this information. And in that sense, Nico, I wanted to ask you about the particular case that I always find so fascinating, and that was of Catalonia. Okay. And of course, how that played out, especially in the media.
Yeah, thank you. But before that, may I disagree a bit with what has been said before? I think just for the sake of discussion, and it's the last panel, so let's have some fun, right? No, I agree with everything that has been said, but I think we need to move the focus a little bit from the people, from the audience, to the environment. Because we are prone to fail to this kind of myth that in the pre-social media or pre-internet world, all citizens were always reading books, checking sources, discussing in order to vote, to make their decisions, etc. So somehow, like what I call the myth of the old Greek, yeah? So all citizens were like that. My impression is it was not like that. The previous generations were as stupid or as smart as we are, so that's not necessarily the big difference. What has changed is the environment, how they get. So what has changed are actually the filters. Before there were these traditional media, so now, but this business model has collapsed to some extent, and then it's because of the rise of the social media. And many people do not see the difference between a professional journalist or someone who really knows about the subject, but anyone with a mobile, with a smartphone, and say, you know, there are a group of guys shooting, and they are shooting someone, I don't know what is happening, yeah, oh, someone has died, yeah? And then they think that, oh, you are seeing the event, so then you know what is going on. And it's not necessarily the case. You talk about your mother. Okay, I bring my mother as well to the discussion.
Two mothers.
My mother has seen or has watched 100,000 times an offside playing when I was at home watching football, soccer, yeah? She didn't understand it. I have explained to her millions of times how it works, what's the logic of the offside. She watched it, but she did not understand it. So it doesn't mean that when you see something, you necessarily understand the keys or whatever. That's the problem. That was a problem, for instance, when it comes to Ukraine. People were just seeing or just watching the fights in the Maidan, but without having any understanding of the broader context or the relationship with Russia, whatever. Then you need the keys to understand that. That's why you need what journalists or experts or whoever that you need to combine research and to spend hours on the desk or reading or whatever with the field. But not only field, this is a typical disease I will speak about Spain so no one gets offended. There is only another Spaniard in the room, so I can say whatever I want. There is a typical disease from the Spanish. I have many friends, journalists, correspondents. Many of them, they just think the field is everything. And finally, the field, it means that the taxi driver, or if you have a good fixer, is your only source of information. And then he or she might be great or not. You don't know. So you need to.
Well, I think that's no universal. I don't think it's necessarily
well,
a Spanish.
Well, yeah, sure, but I don't want no one to get offended or to say so. It's in a safe zone. When it comes to Catalonia, that's a very good story and example. Because the case of Catalonia is also a consequence of one of the most successful disinformation operations of history, which is the Black Legend. Maybe you have heard about it. and it's about Spain, how Spain was in the 16th century, that this kind of image that goes along with Spain for many centuries since the 16th century, that brutal rulers, Inquisition, all this kind of a story. So then it was so successful. This was designed by our Dutch colleagues. There is a good Dutch friend of mine over there. But this was developed by the Dutch and by the British. And I work for a British institution. I love United Kingdom. But this was so successful that 4 centuries after is still a reference. And when it comes to Catalonia, there is an inclination, because you are combining this with the Franco times that ended news 40 years ago, It has nothing to do, the country, with the Franco times, But still, for many of those who were not familiar with the issue, that was the reference. Oh, you see Inquisition, Franco, these Spaniards. So it was easy for separatists in Catalonia, which is a very polarizing and divisive issue. I'm based in Barcelona, and if you would have invited someone else, maybe the position will be completely different. It's an issue that half of the society thinks that independence is the solution to our problems, half of the people, and it's not an ethnic division, thinks that it's bad. So it has been a very good example of that. How it was used by Russia, this case? Firstly, and mostly for the domestic audience, because of this general narrative. Europe is about to collapse, there is no real democracy. You see in Crimea people were allowed to vote, while in Catalonia they try to peacefully vote, and you see they are hit by the police. And they were feeding this narrative mostly and initially for the Russian domestic audience, and to somehow was a test, or they were trying, or they were testing the narrative that is now put in place, or they are pushing forward, which is the one about the yellow vest in France, that they are the real French people against the globalist elites, blah, blah, blah. So it was basically the same, and it's actually, and I finish with this, the end, the fun, let's say, or the funny ending point was that they were, the Russian media in general were disappointed, because they were expecting for riots, people being killed in the street and blah, 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 and that was extremely, extremely, extremely unlikely. And then they got disappointed and so frustrated, so now they put their expectations on the yellow vest.
And one of the things that you notice from everyone's story is that when you talk about disinformation, there are particular countries that it's country specific, and it's specific. It has its specificities in each country, and especially in Europe, it's one thing in Spain, it's a different thing in Bosnia, etc. One of the things that I've also noticed is that, at least to me, there seems to be a need for everyone in Europe to kind of understand the specificities of what's going on in each other's country in order to fight this better. And is this the way that we should go forward? I mean, is this something that we should be doing? Please.
Well, I mean, my answer to that is that you need both. I mean, good example where this melange, good mixture, is actually applied is our colleagues' work, NATO's sister organization, European Union, the colleagues in Stratcom who have this info thing. And what they do, they have people who are fluent in the languages of different countries of European Union, so they do, they follow, they describe, they kind of, name the beast, if you like, some of it is funny, some of it is not so funny, but they can show specific examples well documented in different countries, But at the same time, while doing this, they are obviously trying to bring various common strands, because the thing is that, there is a bit of a sort of disinformation international. I mean, they, they compare notes. They see how various tools, how effective they are, and so on. So this element of sharing as a minimum, and ideally followed up, if possible, by attribution, by actually specifying the problem as it is on a more international level is the right recipe. But more broadly, I would say that you need to look at different levels of responsibility. Everybody's got a job to do. Governments. You have to say what are, for example, you have to describe the political ends and who are those doing this, and that is a responsibility of the governments. Plus, matters of policy. I mean, seeing it from a NATO perspective, I mean, this information, the aim is to undermine our ability to work together. This has military consequences, question of deterrence, etc. The purpose is basically disunited. Parliaments, legislation. You know, I was at the presentation a few weeks ago in Brussels, some very clever people who do a lot of fact-checking and so on, they use the most modern tools. And one of the colleagues from UK, I think it's called Who Targets Me, they're analyzing UK and other countries, those campaigns, political campaigns, which are not sort of visible, right? And it's doing great work, but he said, look, I don't want to be doing this work in 10 years' time because I want specific legislation to deal with, and it's possible. Then you have the media. Who is, all due respect, looking at the example of Western Balkans, who is forcing mainstream media in different countries in the region to republish without even some changes of the comments of the products provided for free, local languages by Sputniks and the others?
Oh,
who does?
Do you want me to
I
answer
think that would be
this?
very interesting, what you say. And then just not to get the other, the civil society has, and individual people as well. Alexander Dedovich, who was mentioned, sadly, our good friend who passed away, he was one of those people from here, from this country, who did huge amount of work with his NGO from, I think he was not directly dealing with disinformation, but what he was doing, bringing young people from different countries of the region for free-flowing discussion, for explaining things, debates based on facts. In a way, that was the most productive form of grassroots work against disinformation.
Adams, your organization also is international. What are your experiences?
Well, I mean, as I said in the beginning, disinformation is just one tool of it. We have a wider. We look at all this problem from the wider hybrid environment. There's always thing, of course, that you can follow and kind of fight with the consequences. But I would say that I would like to see that we kind of course, that we develop our own narrative and kind of be a step ahead. So just don't try to kind of fight the disinformation or fight the consequences, but try to bring completely then from different viewpoint, bring in our own narrative, and then try to educate the society in that way. So to provide them additional sources of information, so they don't have to follow this. So when they hear some disinformation, they will probably already have something in mind. Oh yes, but it was something different from government or from media already. So in that sense.
Okay. And Tomasz, we have talked about your work and your initiative, how to combat disinformation.
And actually, I think that international cooperation is crucial in tackling disinformation worldwide, since there is no single region where this problem would not be present. I've been to South Korea, I've been to whole Europe, I've been to many states, and everywhere I went, there was some kind of problem with disinformation that was changing the society, changing the political system, changing the way people think, what are their preferences, etc., what are the fears, what are the debates in the society. And I like to quote Niall Ferguson, because he said that once you are trying to defeat a network, you have to create a network. And the players who are actually creating disinformation in all particular countries, they are capable of cooperation. And by the Russian model, we can see that the narratives that are invented in St. Petersburg are being then retaken by Sputnik and other outlets, and they are being distributed among many Western countries and other parts of the world outside of Russia. And we really need to step up the game and actually initialize a same level of cooperation and ability, that once we have a narrative as a West, we need to be able to produce it and distribute it to our partners in other countries. And for instance, in Slovakia in 2017, we started an initiative called I'm Here, which is focused on tackling hate speech. It's a cooperation of just common citizens who are willing to do something about the spread of disinformation and hate speech in the comment sections on social media. And these people are working together to actually change the sentiment in a debate where, for instance, there's a discussion about LGBT, and in Slovakia there's a huge influx of hate against this sexual minority. And the people from I Am Here initiative come to those discussion fields and they show empathy and facts about that particular theme. So the people who are reading the section wouldn't only see hateful comments and etc., but they will see actually that there are plenty of people who are representing civilization, and the way the debate is being led is way too different, and this helps to prevent the normalization of hate speech. And for instance, this one initiative was not invented in Slovakia. It was invented in Sweden, and right now there's like 10 more countries in the world, including Germany, Czech Republic, and others, that are using the same technique to actually tackle hate speech. And it works universally, and this was the idea of a young one couple, Mina Dennert and her husband. And then, for instance, in Slovakia, we have a couple of examples of techniques that were invented by Slovaks. For instance, there's this technology called Checkbot, and I was participating in the process when we were creating this robot, who is actually helping people using Facebook via Messenger to check the article they were reading. And we are using, it's a list of conspiracy sites we have under domain Konspiratory.sk, which is one older web page, which is also of Slovak origin. And this checkbot actually helps Slovaks to understand how to recognize what is disinformation and what are the values, or what critical question should person ask when he's trying to find out whether he is consuming a false information or a correct information. And right now we are working with our friends from Baltics to actually impose this project in their country, and also we are trying to impose this project in the United States. So the idea is that one thing can be invented in a small country like Slovakia, but it can work internationally, and eventually we can create a whole toolbox of these technical solutions that can be then took by any country that is interested in dealing with the problem. And mainly we are focusing on creating tools that can be used by ordinary people. So you don't have to be an expert, you don't have to be activist who has plenty of free time to do this. We are just looking for ordinary people who are having this little extra time, few minutes of extra time, that can actually participate in making Infosphere a better thing. So cooperation, international cooperation, is pretty crucial.
Excellent. Rufin, you're up next. I have a question specifically for you. I want us to come back a bit to the Western Balkans, because we are currently in the Western Balkans, and you just gave me your study here, done by your organization, called Propaganda Made to Measure Dimensions of Risk and Resilience in the Western Balkans. And we talked about it very briefly. I didn't get a chance to read it. But what was really interesting to me is what you said was that, I mean, just simplify it, the societies themselves in the Western Balkans were actually more resilient than political actors. How come and why? And what does that actually mean?
Well, I don't have an immediate answer to this question. I would love to hear one. I would love to not just hear it, but also internalize it and spread it. So yeah, we've done this year-long study in assessing vulnerabilities to subversion in the Western Balkans. It's something that it continues our activity in assessing vulnerabilities in the Black Sea region. And the very result that you've mentioned, the one that shows us that the Western Balkans society, when it comes to numbers, and I'm not that good at numbers, I don't remember them exactly, but when it comes to numbers, the resilience of the societies, it's placing almost all the 6 countries below the threshold of being permeable to subversion, whereas when it comes to analyzing the vulnerabilities in the political level of these 6 countries assessed in the project, all of them are showing numbers close, if not beyond the crisis threshold. It might come with no surprise for you that Bosnia and Herzegovina vulnerabilities in the political level scored more than 2, where 3
2 out of 3, yeah.
so the scale is 0 is you don't have a problem at all, and 3 is you're
You're in
you're
deep
a
trouble,
mess.
yeah.
And Bosnia scored more than 2, whereas 2 is the crisis threshold. Getting back to your question, and being a Romanian, I'm very glad to be able to provide you with a good example in terms of how resilient our societies are, because we've just came out of this last electoral exercise, and for Romania was not just European parliamentary elections, but we've also had a referendum on checking with the society if the politicians should be able or not to push legislation that is making them safe for being imprisoned. And the resilience of the Romanian society is very easy to be showcased, because the referendum passed. It gathered more than 40% of the voters, and out of this 40% of voters, I believe it was very close to 90%, 88 or something like this, of the voters who were very much in favor of banning politicians to change the rules and the laws in terms of making themselves safe or for being impeached. So I do believe very much that the resilience, it stays with the population. But that doesn't mean that the other stakeholders in our countries are not shouldn't be forced to step in this arena and help this resilience, because you see, resilience is not like the rhythm, you have it or you don't, you know. It's something that can be built. It's something that can be supported in different
In different ways, different methods. Yeah.
so yeah.
So I think that was a very salient point, and thank you very much. I would like to use this opportunity to open the floor to questions. If there are any questions from the audience, we'd be happy to take them, especially since it's an all-male panel and we'll be talking for so long, so I think it's time to switch to the audience. Please. There in the front row, we have several questions, so we'll just go this way, from left to right, our left.
Hello, thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. I'm Alison Kemp, I'm the British ambassador here. I have 2 questions, if I may. You've talked a great deal about the threats that Europe as a whole faces. I just wondered, if you were doing a SWOT analysis, what you would see as the strengths, particularly what strengths are there in the region when it comes to tackling disinformation. You've mentioned the resilience of the Romanian population. My other question is around every country, as we're looking at how you tackle disinformation, every country has a problem about building capacity. What advice do you have on the best way of building capacity, especially in a small country like Montenegro?
Who would like to take these questions? Well, first question, Robert.
Just trying to have a stab at it. I mean, SWOT analysis, okay. I mean, it's one of the ways in which you can look at this. The thing is that in broad terms, I mean, I start sort of philosophical and then I get more. It's, you know, Perhaps it would have been a better answer to your original question, what keeps one awake at night?
A lack of a
It's a
SWOT in that.
frustration, because I personally believe very strongly that we know what needs to be done. I think, we could go and develop each of the elements of the SWOT thing, but, it's those responsibilities that different stakeholders have. I'm a strong believer that, to successfully deal with this information, you have to be proactive. Because as many colleagues said, it will not go away. It's like, it's a disease which is there, but it requires it. The problem is that when tackling this, knowing even what needs to be done, there are various dilemmas that we face. So, for example, I think there is a growing feeling that particularly social media, because they're a bit special, and we ain't seen nothing yet with artificial intelligence, which, let's face it, I think like some people put it, it is actually a hindrance to freedom of speech. Because freedom to reach is a different thing, right? So with all the techniques which, and the techniques to counter that, they usually are slower than those, and so on. So the first problem is there's a growing belief that you need somehow to regulate a bit. It can't be the Wild West. It works with traditional media to a large extent. But that, of course, comes again, the very concept of free internet and others. Second dilemma, if you like, is on one hand, particularly if you're dealing with long-term, very determined, usually state-run disinformation campaigns, not just disinformation projects or sort of events and so on. You need a lot of voices. That's also part of it. Quantity matters too. But then, if you think of various organizations, including governments per se, well, the famous, you have to stay on a message. Talking about narratives. We have plenty. I believe we have all the possible narratives and all the possible answers. We can easily answer each of the nonsensical or semi-nonsensical that is then employed. But the problem is that clashes this need for having a variety of voices with, in some cases, okay, organization sends us a tweet and needs 5 approval. The last thing is, of course, the most basic observation of all. Negative agenda is much easier to implement than a positive one. And therefore, we have to just be fully aware of this. You have to get a little bit, not dirty, that's not the right word, but you cannot sort of fight this. They're not, Oxford Debating Society rules are not applied. So that's the frustration. We know what needs to be done. We know what each of the stakeholders should be doing, but of course each one has its own variety of reasons why certain things are difficult. But if we have this belief, this conviction, which I strongly believe we should have, that we win, we can win, we're doomed to win, then just by doing this, I think we already kind of striking fear, I hope, into the hearts of those who actually engage it, because it is so important. So the worst thing would be to say, we'll do the calculations and each thing is kind of difficult. No, we do the calculations, but we burst in a battle, and everybody can actually play a role in this.
And your second question was about building capacity, particularly small countries. And I think, Nico, maybe would you like to try and tackle that one? How can we build capacity, especially in countries like Montenegro or Bosnia or any of the Western Balkan 6, for instance?
Well, the small countries probably have an advantage, and this is also related to the Finnish case, because you have more homogeneous, in principle, more homogeneous countries in which you can really call for the responsibility of those, either from the policy-making community, the media, or the business sector. So probably it's easier to some extent. I don't know. I'm not familiar with Montenegro, so I don't know. But to have a common ground or a common message, because that can play a role. In the broader, bigger picture, when it comes to transnational kind of campaigns, following what Robert has said, I think regarding Russia, for instance, or maybe other actors, but definitely Russia, which an important distinction is clearly about the Kremlin. We tend to say Russia because it's a kind of metaphor or symbol that we use, but we are referring actually to the Kremlin and to 20, 25, 30 individuals. I think we need to increase the cost. So to make it clear that this will have anything you do against us, this will have a cost. So we need to some extent to fight back or make clear that our way of implementing or having deterrence capacity is fighting back. Then we can have or impose regulations on social media that has been said by my colleagues, and that has nothing to do with censorship or limiting freedom of speech, because that's not about freedom, it's about the anarchy that we have on social media and on internet. So there is a lot to be, that can be done without affecting at all freedom of speech or free flow of information. And definitely there are technical things that can be done related to this, as Thomas was saying, about bots. We can limit this artificial manipulation of the flow of information or the conversations online. And that has, again, nothing to do with censorship or whatever. Anyone can express and can disseminate whatever information, but then let's make sure that there is not a machine or a software or whatever that manipulates and creates a false impression that something is very big or is really influential or whatever. Let's have organic, natural things taking place. But I will start, well, I will combine everything, but I will start even in small and bigger countries with those with positions of responsibility. So for them, that it really applies. So what I was saying before in my previous intervention, yes, I do believe, I was saying that just for the sake of provoking you a bit, but yes, I do believe that media literacy, all this kind of critical thinking, it's absolutely fine and great. But this really applies normally and historically to 15-20% of population. And this 15-20%, we need to work and to have a coherent understanding and a coherent strategic thinking about the issue. So that's where we can, there is work to be done. That's what I was referring to, this lack of common or deep understanding about the issue, because, and in our societies in general.
Rufin, I think you wanted to add.
I just want to add something to the conversation here about the part of your question regarding advice. What advice do we have here? What maybe envisaged solution do we have for tackling this phenomena? And in my view, it doesn't matter if your country is small or your country is as big as Poland or as big as the United States, maybe. It has to do with engaging the whole of society, in having whole of society approach. Because tackling the phenomena is not, it shouldn't be only with the governmental bodies. Because oftentimes, at least in half of Europe, the problem stays and it is ingrained in the political level and therefore in the governmental bodies. And it's just counterintuitive to put the wolf in charge of the sheep, you know? So engaging whole society approach should be something that everyone should have on their agenda. And it's not just government or civil society or big business or the fact checkers versus, I don't know, the content providers. Everyone should be involved here. And of course, it's not easy to have this approach. It's rather difficult to have it this way. But we should start, our logic should be with this, the whole of society approach. And then the very second step should be starting with the education. It is not enough to have the fact check tools with you. Just to give an example, Tiny tool, the one that you can check the validity of images on Google, or even Google Images. It's something in place for a number of years. But those who are spreading those manipulated images are, if not every time, maybe, 80% of the time, are very much aware that that image is something fishy with it. But it's not on their interest. They're not there to check the validity of the image. They're there to fill the space with information. And getting back to what was previously discussed here about this disinformation campaigns or propaganda perpetrated by foreign actors, foreign state actors like Russia is. I shall also throw on the table a different example, and I think that is something that you're very much aware of it, and maybe you should provide us with more content on this. It's oftentimes not about what the disinformation campaigns perpetrated by Russia in the Western Balkans is creating in our society. The level of media capture in Serbia, for an example, is not something that the Russians were doing. And it's much about what the Serbian government and Mr. Vučić is not regulating maybe enough, or even worse than this.
I think this is a very good question because it has started, I think, a serious conversation between us. My position here is that of a moderator, so I will not chip in with my opinion this time, but maybe next time in one of your roles I'll have more to say. But I think, Anis, you also wanted to just add a
well, I just on a bit different angle, coming back to the point mentioned by Robert on freedom of speech. That's as well one kind of area where we shouldn't be afraid to look into it, because of course freedom of speech is one of the most important values of our democratic societies, but our adversaries know this as well, and of course is using that. Each time we try to kind of limit something, they are saying no, it's not the propaganda, disinformation, you are kind of limiting us of our freedom of speech. So I mean, ideally we shouldn't be afraid of this, look into that area and to see that there's in our 21st century that there is a line where freedom of speech kind of goes against national security. So we should kind of have this in mind, of course have the discussion, because I can see the other side of the argument as well, that governments constantly fail at this because they are abusing the powers given to control, but they are abusing against it our own freedom of speech, and that's here is the problem. But I mean, in the ideal world, I would say that we shouldn't be afraid to look into this, because then we will kind of take out important cards from our adversaries if they would know that we are ready kind of to limit somewhere freedom of speech, and so they will not be able to use their propaganda and disinformation. Just thought from my side.
That's very interesting. I think we should also have had a separate panel just on freedom of speech, because that seems to be one of the key issues when we talk about disinformation and how to deal with it. And it is a major issue. But I would like to hear other questions, because I'm pretty sure there were some in the audience. So yes, please, second row, the gentleman.
I'm Egil Daltveit, the Norwegian Defence Attaché, based at our embassy in Belgrade. Thanks to the panel for taking the position immediately before the end of the conference, and thanks for a good discussion. Primarily, you have addressed disinformation in social media. Robert mentioned traditional media, and we know that traditional media and social media, if you have disinformation in traditional media, that will strengthen the disinformation in social media. And my question goes to the vulnerability of traditional media today because of the economy. There are many journalists and editors that I've spoken to in this region of the world say, well, you know, we don't have the money to produce everything we print. We got to reprint. And you know, if we reprint from this and this and this source, we'll get an ad tomorrow. And if we print what is given to us and asked, put your byline on this and print this, we will get 3 ads. How can we tackle that economic aspect of that is exasperated by the weakness of traditional media?
I think that's a very good question. And anyone who wants to answer is free to go at it first.
That's a key question, the super important question. But well, I think no one has the answer because it's the crisis of this business model. So who knows what will happen in the next 10, 15? Because very few media, I think, is the New York Times and the Economist and very few others that have hundreds of thousands of subscribers, so they can keep working and doing and having, offering good quality information. But then you have the traditional media now is a mixture because they also have this clickbait problem. So you go to a very traditional media in Spain, you go to the main newspapers. So there, first they have the important domestic politics or international news or whatever, and then you have all the stupid things. See this guy riding a horse and jumping from a second floor building, blah, 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 before dying. Yeah, see the video here. And it's because they want to attract or these kind of things that you have been always having or cooking bad your breakfast or your bacon, yeah? Learn to these kind of things. It's just to attract traffic. And this is the problem of the business model. And so far, I think there is no clear solution because there is also another problem. There is one case in Spain of one media that is funded only by subscribers. And everyone is saying, oh, it's great. You see, journalism is still alive. There is hope. Well, it's fine, and this media is okay, but there is a problem, for instance, because anytime you publish something that goes against, it's a very left-wing medium, respectable and fine, and they are good journalists and doing a good job. But when they publish something that goes against what, let's say, the bulk of the subscribers like, then they have so many complaints. Or if you keep publishing this kind of propaganda, I will cancel my subscription. Then they refused to publish things about Ukraine. This was specifically about Ukraine. Because the case of Ukraine, which Spanish audience is not familiar with, and on the left wing, they basically bought these Russian narratives that Maidan is about Nazis, all Ukrainians are Nazis, they are committing massacres against poor Russian-speaking people, etc., etc. So the moment you publish something that goes against what they like, believe, or whatever, and then they decided not to publish materials about Ukraine or whatever that can challenge. So it's not necessarily or a completely perfect solution. So I'm sorry, I don't have a best answer to your question, which is a key question.
Yeah, I think it's a very complex question because as a journalist, I'll just add a bit to what you just said. You either have this model of media that kind of cater to your confirmation bias, or others. I think the best thing would be to have a strong and independent public service broadcaster. That would be my take. But please, Robert, you had something to add.
I would like to add a couple of things. One is actually to make a pitch and advertise the work of people like Alexander, because not everybody, maybe everybody does, but he's a very good investigative journalist, among other things. And that is a pretty rare breed, if I were to offer my humble opinion in this part of the world. So whatever form of appeal we could make is, support and protect investigative journalists, because that takes much more guts and actually it's time consuming. It's a problem not only related to the region, but let's be honest, there are certain structural problems related to the media in the region, and surprise, surprise, they are to do with close interconnectedness of the media and the political world. So, one of the key things is transparency. As much transparency as possible. Why it's a win-win thing? Because first of all, again, if you believe that we have the good stories, we have the truth is out there, well then show it. I started taking journalists who come from countries which, let's say, they are particularly targeted by various forms of disinformation when they come to NATO HQ, to the NATO cafeteria, and said, apart from it's nice to offer people coffee, I said, well, first thing is, let me show you. We don't eat children for breakfast. We eat croissant, huh? Okay. More serious, we do a lot of, that's serious too, but we do a lot of prestos and things. We've just had prestos to KFOR from Serbian media, and we'll do more and so on. In other words, if you believe do more of this. And it's a good deal for the journalists because they have things to write, to show as well. Secondly, it's TV, it's still very important. And Nico mentioned Ukraine, which has a very, very big, if you like, internet segment and so on. But when it comes to political processes, including the most recent presidential election, 85% of people de facto got the information from TV. So TVs require a particularly sort of scrutiny, clear rules. And one of the basic principles is level playing field. If you can't sort of, fight every nook and cranny of this information, but at least make it a level playing field. And then you will see that the good guys will win because they are more professional, because they are more honest. But if you don't have clear rules, or if you have rules which actually, and that is unfortunately very often the case in social media, they prefer disinformation, then you're putting yourself in a more difficult position. It's like fighting with one or sometimes two hands tied behind.
Well, thank you, Robert, for that answer.
Well, it was deserved. Plus, it actually really was to illustrate this specific issue. But if it's part of the advertising, you deserve it.
Thanks. I'm humbled by that. Let's see if there are any other questions. Do we have anyone else who would like to ask one final question, and then we're out through the door?
I promise.
Who do we have? Yeah, gentleman in the first row.
Thanks. Mike Holtzel, Johns Hopkins. What about the verbal jujitsu of weaponizing the problem? And I'm saying politicians who, with no cost to themselves, when they hear something about them usually that they don't like, they just say that's fake news. I mean, catering to the cynicism of the people and this is obviously going on. Alternative facts, actually, the wonderful picture that's right up there right now, I can't believe I'm marching for facts. That's probably as a result of the alternative facts statement that most people know about. But what about the people who don't purvey fake news, but turn it upside down so that if something comes against them, they just want to discredit it? What do you do about that?
I think we have several candidates who could answer this question. I'm going to start with Tomáš.
Actually, we have pretty nice examples from Slovakia when we were actually using this jiu-jitsu approach. And for instance, during our campaign when we were promoting Checkbot, that was in March 2019, we were getting attacks from people that we are actually sharing propaganda and our bot is not here to actually increase media literacy, but we are trying to promote this liberal propaganda, etc. And we knew that this is going to happen, and therefore we created a website where we introduced our team. And me, as a part of the team from Open Society Foundation, was like water on the mill for those conspiracies, because I work for a foundation that was founded by George Soros, and this guy is considered really evil in Slovakia. Like, everybody believes like he's eating babies, and I don't know what. It's crazy. And because of that, Checkbot became, it was a huge success in terms of attention of people, because everybody was thinking like the people who are spreading this information that we are this evil initiative and we are trying to manipulate people, it actually worked according to our plan. And we have one major politician who is actually sharing a lot of disinformation, and he's creating his own narratives that present this false reality where Soros is devil, where my organization is really evil, and etc. And he was giving us a lot of space for our project Checkbot. And basically this is what we wanted, because Checkbot was invented as a solution for the people who are actually following this kind of information. So therefore they helped us to get to the target group. And in a matter of days, we were capable of promoting our product to 500,000 people. We wouldn't have that coverage without their attention, and we were just misusing their narratives that they are using to manipulate people to actually put our product, which was increasing media literacy of the audience. And those guys were thinking that, okay, they are actually hurting us, but we were actually encouraging them to continue until a few days later they just realized that we are really positive about this coverage they are giving us, and then they stopped talking about us at all. But that was too late, and we were already all over the Slovak internet. So there are ways how to misuse their techniques and actually burn the burner. Or
yeah, one of my favorite conspiracy theory groups is the Flat Earth Society. Fascinating stuff, and but I'm convinced that, for instance, in Bosnia, the person who runs their persons are absolutely in on the joke, and they're fully aware that what they're saying is crazy. So one of the ways that I've noticed that people are fighting this sort of, on the other hand, there are people who do believe in it, don't get me wrong, but what I've noticed is also that there are some people fighting it by using their hashtag, to post photos from the airplane or to post photos of what have you, and just use their hashtag to kind of poke fun back at them. And right now there are more people who are doing that than the actual people who are supporting the Twitter page that claims that the earth is flat. So I think those kinds of examples work, but I think that the most important thing is to always use truth and to be, to stick to the truth and stick to facts, even when you use not the same tools necessarily, but the same approach to these things. I don't know if Rufin, you would agree.
No, I'm very much agreeing with you. Just keep your eyes on the ball, right?
Right, and the earth is not flat, it's round. Well, we can test later in the pool. Thank you all very much for being such wonderful panelists, and thank you all in the audience for being here with us until the very last minute. Thanks.